This is the people of the state of Colorado versus James Egan Holmes, case number 12 CR 1522. The record should reflect that Mr. Holmes is present with his attorneys and the prosecutors are present as well. We are outside the presence of the jury. Two things. First, with respect to the last objection, I remember during the break that during opening statements, the defense also mentioned sort of the opposite of what the prosecution argued. The defense argued that the deterioration in Mr. Holmes' school performance is an indicator that he was having mental health issues. And so just as the prosecution is arguing that there was really no change in the way Mr. Holmes was interacting with people at school, the defense is sort of arguing the opposite. So I think Exhibit P-TR-1200 goes to the issue of mental illness, and if there is mental illness, the severity of that mental illness. And so, of course, by extension, that means that it goes to the issue of insanity. So I wanted to supplement the record with that. Secondly, I checked the motion that the media filed earlier with respect to getting access to exhibits that are admitted. It's motion C-193. The motion included a request not only for admitted exhibits, but also exhibits that are not admitted, which I am not granting access to. But in addition, exhibits that are admitted and not published. And so the transcript would fall within that. I brought it up because my ruling related to written material, and this is written material, it's just that it was not displayed on the big screen. So the prosecution has stated its no position. I think the prosecution said that it might make sense to provide the audio recording as well. I'm not going to do that. But in terms of the transcript, is there any other argument you want to make, Ms. Nelson?
No, we can take it.
Okay. The objection's overruled. We'll provide the transcript. It's been admitted, and I don't see any concerns with providing it. So we'll include it among the documents that are provided to the media, given that it's been admitted and given that it's been published to the jury, albeit not on the big screen that is in the view of the CCTV camera. Okay, let's bring the jury in, please. Please be seated, everyone. The record should reflect that the jury has joined us again. Welcome back, members of the jury. Right before the break, the prosecution was still in the middle of its direct examination of Dr. Vijayaraghavan, and the doctor has resumed the witness stand. There was a request by the prosecution to admit People's Exhibit P-TR-1200, and that exhibit has been admitted over objection. Mr. Brockler, you may proceed with your direct examination. And doctor, I will remind you that you're still under oath.
Mercifully, Judge, we are not in the middle. I just only have a few questions left.
Okay.
Sir, because of what's contained in the emails, I want to ask you, do you go by a nickname that might appear in some of those emails?
People call me Sook.
Sook, S-U-K-E?
Yeah.
All right. The last couple things I want to talk with you about are this. You talked about, at the beginning of this application process, applicants like the defendant expressing to you what their career ambitions were. Do you remember, in essence, what the defendant's career ambition was as he headed into this program?
Well, as I recall, he expressed interest in being an academic scientist, remaining in academia and after his PhD. Remaining in academia after his PhD.
What was the status of that career ambition as he walked out of your office in June of 2012?
Well,
I'd object to speculation, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Was that going to happen through your program when he walked out of your office in June of 2012?
no.
Objection, speculation.
Overruled.
Go ahead, sir. What was it?
No.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
Nothing further, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right. Cross-examination, Ms. Brady.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So James Holmes applied to the graduate school at UC Denver in early 2011. Is that correct?
Yes.
And as you testified on direct, that's a competitive process to get accepted into that graduate school.
Yes.
And I think you testified that there were approximately 75 applications to get into that program.
They are usually 75. I'm not sure what the number was for that particular year.
But that would be an average number?
Approximately. Yeah.
Okay. And approximately 12 or 13 are invited back to that recruitment weekend that you described for the jury.
Yes.
And Mr. Holmes was one of those 12 or 13 that was invited in for an interview.
Yes.
Out of the 12 or 13 that are interviewed, approximately 5 or 6 are accepted.
More than that are accepted. Some choose to go to other places.
Got you. So approximately 10 are offered spots, and then maybe half of those accept.
Yeah, something around that. Yeah.
Okay. And you knew at that time that Mr. Holmes was coming from University of California at Riverside.
Yes.
And he did his undergraduate degree in neurobiology.
Yes.
And as you testified, he came in with an excellent grade point average.
Yes.
And he came in with an excellent GRE score.
Yes.
Would you agree with me that it would take someone who was pretty self-motivated to get out of undergraduate degree in neurobiology, it would take someone who's pretty motivated to get those kind of scores?
Yes.
You couldn't be lazy and get those kind of scores.
Yes.
He came to your program with 3 letters of recommendation.
Yes.
2 of those were authored by well-recognized scientists who were known to you and your committee, correct?
Yes.
And those letters of recommendation were extremely positive in describing Mr. Holmes.
Yes.
They did not say that he was unmotivated, did they?
No.
It said that they described him as motivated, smart, and committed to research.
Yes.
Because of those things, Mr. Holmes was considered at the top of the application pool when he showed up here in Denver.
Yes.
He did 7 interviews with faculty members for about 30 minutes each, you said.
Yes.
And some of the concerns from those interviews were that he appeared extremely quiet.
Yes.
And there was some concern about whether he was interested in the program.
Yes.
Despite those letters of recommendation that said he was very committed to research.
Yes.
So that seemed to be inconsistent, what was coming from UC Riverside and what your folks were seeing when they interviewed him.
Not necessarily. If he wasn't interested in joining our place, he could appear disinterested.
Did he seem to you like he was interested in joining your school?
Yes, or at least I didn't have any evidence to suggest otherwise.
Okay, and you had conversation with him about the kind of research that you do, and you thought that he seemed interested in your research.
Yes,
But there was this continuing concern about how socially awkward he was.
yes,
You have, you've described him as a sort of person who doesn't really initiate conversation very easily.
I would agree, yeah.
And he's not the type of person to tell stories over dinner, I think you've said.
Yeah,
Is that true?
Yeah.
But you did feel that he was very smart. Was that your impression?
yes.
You testified just a few minutes ago that he wanted to be an academic scientist. What does that mean to you?
That usually means somebody who's interested in getting a job in a university or a college and continuing research in their own laboratories.
So he wanted to,
Laboratories.
so he wanted to have his own lab and do research. And when he told you that, you felt that he was being forthright and honest with you about those goals.
Yeah.
Is it, yes?
Yes,
Thank you. When you've described him, you describe him as sort of asocial, not that he's rude or impolite, but just that he's extremely quiet.
yes,
And you told Mr. Brockler earlier he was always very polite and professional with you.
yes,
Never disrespectful or rude.
no,
You have described him as a thoughtful person. Is that your impression of him?
I would, yeah, I would have thought that, yeah.
But he was subdued.
Yes,
He always dressed appropriately.
yes,
He appeared scholarly to you.
if you could define that. But,
I
yes,
guess just another word for smart and interested in learning.
yes,
And you were pleased when he was accepted at your school.
yes,
School began in August of 2012. The official school year began August of 2012.
yes,
And as you testified, you were his academic advisor while he was there,
yes,
and met with him approximately once a month for maybe 30 minutes.
yeah, I would assume something like that.
Okay. So didn't spend a great deal of time with him.
No,
Did he ever seek you out, knock on your door or seek you out for questions or conversation?
he might have, but I don't recall.
Okay. And is it fair to say you didn't have much of a personal relationship with him?
Yes,
At one point you said that he was a complete mystery to you. Is that fair?
I don't remember saying that, but it would be fair.
Okay. He did have some mannerisms that you were trying to help him with.
Yes,
And in the past, you've sort of described those as tics or odd mannerisms. Can you tell the jury a little bit more about what those involved?
I think most of them involved some kind of not in context hand gestures or facial expressions, more than tics.
So more than a tic. Is that-
Yeah, I mean, I would explain it as some out of context hand gestures and facial expressions. Yes.
Okay, that didn't seem appropriate for
Yes.
the context.
Yeah.
And again, appropriate meaning what you would, not rude or offensive,
No,
but
it's just that it didn't go with the context.
Okay. He never appeared to be an attention seeker to you?
No.
Quite the opposite. He seemed to be someone who sort of stayed in the background.
Yes.
In fact, a big criticism of him is that he didn't interact enough.
Yes.
both with professors and with fellow students.
Yes.
While you knew him, was his hair always the color that it is now, brown?
I think so.
Your Honor, if I can approach the witness, I'm going to show him Defense Exhibit D-TR-7.
Yes.
Professor, does that appear to be a series of pictures of Mr. Holmes?
Yes.
Have you ever seen those pictures before?
Yes. Some of them, maybe.
Can you explain to the jury under what circumstance you saw those pictures?
In the newspapers.
And can you describe what Mr. Holmes looks like in that series of pictures?
His hair is dyed orange, and his eyes look vacant or tired in some of these photos.
Your Honor, may we publish that picture so that the jury can see it?
Are you moving to admit it?
Not at this time. Or I can. I'll move to admit it at this point.
You can't publish it without it having it admitted, but if you're moving to admit it, is there any objection? Let's have counsel approach. Okay, the objection on relevance is overruled. The objection on foundation or lack of foundation is sustained pursuant to Rule 602. But Ms. Brady, you may establish more foundation.
When you saw that picture of Mr. Holmes with the orange hair in the newspaper, was that shortly after July 20th of 2012?
Yes.
Within days?
Yes.
Had you ever seen Mr. Holmes with orange hair before?
No.
Had his hair always been brown prior, when you knew him the
Yes.
entire time?
Yes.
Your Honor, I would move to admit Defense Exhibit 7.
Any additional objection? No, sir, thank you. All right, Exhibit D-TR-7 is admitted and may be published.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor, I want to talk to you about just an overview of Mr. Holmes's first year at the school. As his academic advisor, were you familiar with sort of the schedule that he kept as a first-year grad student there?
Yes.
Your Honor, if I can approach the witness, please.
Yes.
I'm going to show the witness what's been marked D-TR-8. Professor, have you had a chance to look at Exhibit 8 before coming in today?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury generally what Exhibit 8 is, please?
So Exhibit 8 contains a timeline with a series of courses along that James had to take, and a list of the lab rotations that he had to take, and ending with the oral exam on June 7th.
And does that timeline sort of help put into perspective which labs he was taking while he was taking certain classes
Yes,
over the period of August to June 2011 to 2012?
yes.
Your Honor, I'd move to admit D-TR-8.
Any objection? None, sir. All right, without objection, it is admitted and may be published.
Thank you. If we could zoom into the three top boxes there, please. Is that as big as it gets? Professor, can you tell us what is represented by the three white boxes?
So the three white boxes represent the three lab rotations that James did, and the PI or the mentor of the lab is given on top, and so they were Achim Klug, Mark Delacroix, and Kurt Fried, and below that are the members of the lab who would have overlapped with him, and then the period of the rotation for each of them is given, which is August 2011 to November for the first rotation, November to February for the second rotation, and February to May for the third rotation.
Thank you. If we could pull out the core courses, please. That's better. Professor, if you could tell us what is represented by each of these boxes with the core courses.
So the core courses are a list of courses that all our incoming PhD students take, irrespective of what program they are in. So this is taken by all the students who matriculate in a particular year, and this core is split into 5, and usually goes through fundamentals of molecular biology and biophysics for all students.
Right, and then what do the dates correspond to?
So the dates are the start and the end dates for each of these core modules.
Thank you. If we could call out the bottom boxes, please. The bottom 5 boxes, please. Professor, what do these represent?
So in addition to the core courses that I mentioned, which are taken by all graduate students, neuroscience students are expected to take more specialized neuroscience-related courses, and these are listed here. The first one they take is cellular and molecular neurobiology, which goes from August to November. And then there is systems neurobiology, also known as fundamentals of neurobiology. That's from December to March. And third is developmental neurobiology. That's from March to May. And overlapping these are 2 other courses, one of which is taken by all neuroscience students, which is the grant writing workshop, where we teach students how to write scientific grants. And then in addition, there is an elective course which the students can choose to take, and that is the biological basis of psychiatric and neurological disorders.
Thank you. If we could call out the blue box to the far right, please. And Professor, what does this box represent?
So this represents the preliminary exam that I had talked about previously. And this was, as I said, an oral preliminary exam. And it was held June 7th, 2012, and the three members of the examining committee are Doctors Sather, Restrepo, and Fenninger.
Right, thank you. Did you actually have an opportunity to lecture at one of the classes that Mr. Holmes was in?
I think I gave, I'm not sure, I think I did give 2 lectures in that class.
Okay, and was your observation that Mr. Holmes remained completely silent unless you specifically called on him?
Yes.
One of the 3 committee members for that final oral exam, I think you said was Carl Fenninger.
Yeah.
Has Dr. Fenninger passed away since 2012?
Yes, I think last month.
I'll talk to you for a minute about those 3 labs. You've testified already that undergrad students go through a series of 1, 2, and then the 3rd lab during the course of the year.
Yes.
And it's somewhat up to the student to seek out a lab or one of the instructors that student wants to work with.
Yes.
And the 3 labs that Mr. Holmes did were shown on that last exhibit we looked at.
Yes.
And the first one you said was with Achim Klug.
Yes.
And that's K-L-U-G.
Right.
Okay. And as you testified earlier, Dr. Klug had concerns about whether Mr. Holmes was interacting enough in the lab.
Yes.
I take it that in the laboratory there are students who are working together toward a common purpose. Is that accurate?
In the broad scheme of things, yes.
Okay, so that can't be done just by yourself. You have to interact with the principal investigator and with the other graduate students.
Yes.
Okay, and that seemed to be what Mr. Holmes was receiving criticism about.
Yes.
Not being able to do that.
Right.
And you shared those criticisms with Mr. Holmes, that he was being criticized for not interacting.
Yes.
And he seemed receptive to your suggestion that he needed to do that
Yes.
better. And yet the second lab with Professor Delacroix, things were not any better.
Yes.
In fact, it seemed like maybe they were worse.
Yes.
Professor Delacroix said that Mr. Holmes was completely non-interactive.
Yes.
And Professor Delacroix had concerns about Mr. Holmes' experimental capabilities.
Yes.
And again, in the third lab with Professor Freed, the criticism was that Mr. Holmes was not interacting enough. And throughout the entire time that you knew Mr. Holmes, he had a flat affect.
Yes.
Meaning he did not show much or any emotion.
Right.
Just very flat. When a grad student is in these labs, at the end of the lab, they have to do a short oral presentation.
Yes.
And that was what you were describing, that there's a PowerPoint and they do the short presentation and then the people in the room can ask questions.
Yes.
And you said that part of the criticism of Mr. Holmes in those lab presentations was that he appeared, I think you said, mechanical or very sort of flat still.
Yes.
But he would awkwardly try and insert these jokes into the presentation.
Yes.
And the people watching the presentation were very uncomfortable with his attempt at humor.
Yes.
Were there also concerns about these funny hand gestures and facial expressions that you talked about earlier?
Not that anybody raised them as concerns.
Okay, but those were concerns that you were addressing with him. On the lab sheet that the prosecution talked to you about, that green, yellow, red evaluation sheet, you filled that out because you watched Mr. Holmes in his first lab presentation.
Yes.
And I think, if my memory serves me, you gave him 7 marks in the green area, that he did pretty good in 7 of those areas.
I assume so, yeah. I don't remember.
But you gave him yellow marks, which would be the middle rating in his mannerisms. The category is mannerisms of the student were appropriate, and that was one area where you did not give him the green good mark, you gave him a yellow mark.
Yes.
Indicating some concerns about that.
Yes.
And response and responding appropriately with the audience. That was another area where you gave him the yellow mark indicating
Yes.
concerns. But in several other areas, you felt like he was doing okay.
Yes.
And that was the first lab rotation.
Yes.
Do you agree that the mannerisms and the interaction with the audience, those are both areas that involve the social aspect of graduate school?
Yes.
Now, those 3 lab presentations, those are different than the final end-of-the-year oral preliminary exam. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So the very final end-of-the-year exam occurred, like the chart said, June 7th of 2012?
Yes.
With those 3 members of the staff who would listen to the presentation and ask questions of the student, testing what they had learned that year.
Right. I think the prelims did not have an independent presentation from the student. It was more of a question-answer
Okay.
kind of
So that
session.
was more of the 3 committee members asking questions to test knowledge.
Yes.
And you were not present for that final exam.
No.
It's only those 3 committee members.
Yes.
And the committee expressed after that final exam concern that Mr. Holmes did not conceptually understand the topics. Is that correct?
I think that he was weak on certain concepts that were covered in these topics.
And they were concerned that he didn't have any more than a superficial understanding of the concepts.
Yes.
And despite that, the committee, in conversation with you, decided to have him do a retest.
Yes.
And that would have involved Mr. Holmes going to those 3 committee members and saying, hey, what did I miss? What do I need to work on to do better at the next test?
Yes.
The program does all it can to make sure that a student does well. Is that fair?
Yes.
Explain that to the jury, please.
I think when we admit a student, we assume that given the right resources and help, they would succeed. And we invest a lot on these students, both in terms of faculty time as well as in terms of financial resources. And therefore, I think our aim is to do everything we can to make sure that they succeed.
And it's in that spirit that Mr. Holmes was being offered this second chance to retake the preliminary exam.
Yes.
When you met with Mr. Holmes to talk about this retest, do you believe that conversation took place approximately June 11th?
Yes.
If you need to look at those emails, that might help you remember exactly when that meeting would have taken place.
I think I don't have it with me.
Are you referring to Exhibit P-TR-1200?
Yes, sir.
I don't have him. I think I give him back to Mr. Brockler. Do you have him, Mr. Brockler?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there we go. Thank you, Ms. Curlins.
Thank you.
And I can maybe help you. I think it's 3 pages from the back might help you with that date.
Yeah, so this is June 11th.
So that was the day that Mr. Holmes came to your office to talk about the preliminary exam.
Yes.
You explained to Mr. Holmes that he didn't do well and that he would have to do a retest.
Yes.
And you said fairly quickly he told you he was just going to quit the program.
Yes.
And that was very unexpected from him.
Yes.
He took the news without any outward reaction,
Yes.
like he didn't get angry,
No.
he didn't yell,
No.
he didn't get defensive,
No.
he didn't just stomp out.
No.
He said to you, I don't do well with oral communication.
Yes.
Was that the last conversation that you had with Mr. Holmes?
Yes.
And again, just to be clear, you didn't tell him he had to leave the program,
No.
and you didn't encourage him to leave the program.
No.
In fact, you, like you said before, the program wanted to give him another chance to help him be successful.
Yes.
The status of Mr. Holmes' academic situation at that point was he was going to have to take this retest, correct?
Yes.
And there was figuring out whether Professor Klug or Professor Freed would have him back in their lab.
Yes.
So that the doors were not closed to 2 out of the 3 labs.
Yes.
It was still possible he could have joined those labs.
It was still a possibility, yes.
It was being discussed.
Yes.
If worse came to worse, could Mr. Holmes have also done maybe a summer lab as another option?
In some cases, yeah, we would have allowed that.
So that's a possible exception?
Yes.
So it was not that he positively did not have any home lab to go to?
Yeah, it was not a conclusive thing.
It was just somewhat uncertain and needed more discussion?
Yes.
Can I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
Professor, that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you have any redirect, Mr. Brockler?
I want to pick up where Ms. Brady left off, Professor, and that is, to be certain, the status of Mr. Holmes' academic career at CU was that he was going to be afforded the opportunity to do again those things at which he had struggled and not improved since the very beginning?
Yes.
There were a couple other things that Ms. Brady had asked you about I want to talk to you about. Can we put up the defense exhibit that was the picture of the defendant with the orange hair in court? And I don't remember which number that is, I'm sorry.
It's 7. D-TR-7.
7. Could that be published again? You talked about this, remember that, Professor?
Yes.
And you hadn't seen the defendant like this before.
No.
Do you know why he changed his hair color?
You mean his motivation for doing it?
Yeah, do you have any idea?
No.
Did he always appear to you when you met with him with glasses on?
No.
He didn't wear glasses at all, did he?
No.
So that's a change too, right?
Right.
How about facial hair?
I don't recollect him having facial hair.
Now, had you ever seen the defendant in court before this?
No.
Had you ever met with him after he tried to murder a theater full of people?
No.
Objection, Your Honor.
What's your objection? Overruled?
Go ahead, sir.
No.
Had you ever seen him sitting in a situation where he was utterly in fear for his future?
No.
Do you know who picked these specific expressions or mid-expressions to put into this picture?
No.
All right, that's all I have on that one. Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Judge. Sir, one of the questions you were asked by Ms. Brady was if the defendant himself had ever affirmatively reached out to you for input or something. Do you remember that question?
Yes.
I want you to take a look at people's, I think it's TR 1200 is how to, and I want you to go to an email dated August 16th of 2011.
I believe it's the top email.
Oh, the top email. Yes.
Who's that an email from?
That's an email from James.
To you?
Yes.
Is he seeking something from you?
He asked whether he could rotate this upcoming fall quarter. Let me just read this. Will this upcoming fall quarter be a good time for me to rotate with you?
Is that something where he's exercising initiative to ask you about joining your lab?
Yeah, that email, yes.
And that didn't happen?
No.
Take a look at February 19th, 2012. That email there, who's that
Yes.
email from?
So that's an email from James
To you.
to me.
What's he seeking in that email?
It says, when would be a convenient time for you in having a practice rotation talk?
He's reaching out to you to ask you to help him with his...
That's a mandatory thing to do. So all students have to rehearse their rotation talks with their advisor.
And this is him not waiting on you, but him reaching out to you to
Yes.
set it up. Take a look at May 14th, 2012.
It's a similar email saying, when would you like to meet for a rotation pre-talk?
Again, him trying to get onto your schedule to do this. Fair?
Yes.
Now, a couple of the other areas that Miss Brady talked to you about. She asked you about his, I guess, motivation perhaps to be in this program, and you had responded with, well, maybe it wasn't our particular program that he may have been interested in. Do you remember that exchange?
Yes.
Do you know whether or not the defendant had the year prior to applying to CU applied to and been rejected from more than half a dozen programs?
No.
Would that give you some indication that CU maybe wasn't his first choice?
Objection, speculation.
Sustained pursuant to Rule 602.
Thank you, sir. And in terms of someone, we sort of touched on this, but Ms. Brady got into more detail with you. Those letters of recommendation from undergrad and those grades and his performance, you remember Ms. Brady talked to you about motivation and initiative and stuff like that?
Yes.
Is the level of motivation and initiative necessary to achieve good grades in undergrad different from the motivation and initiative needed to succeed in these laboratories?
Judge, I'm going to object to speculation because I think it would be different depending on the schools.
Overruled?
Could you repeat that question?
Yeah. The level of motivation and effort to get good grades in undergrad, is that a different kind of motivation and initiative that you need to show in the experiments in succeeding in these labs?
Yeah, in some ways it is, in the sense that the ability to succeed in undergrads is much more defined, whereas with research it's something that you're not sure what the outcome is going to be even if you put in an effort. So it's less of an outcome-dependent motivation, in the sense that you could work 10 hours a day and not get an experiment to work, but you still need to be motivated and self-driven to do those experiments. Whereas I know from my undergrad that if I put in 10 hours and study my course material, I'll do well in the exam.
Can I follow up with that?
Yeah.
For classroom setting, even here in this grad course, you get a syllabus. Is that fair?
Yes.
What's the purpose of that syllabus?
In the classroom setting is to sort of outline the elements of what the students need to know.
And maybe the materials you're supposed to read.
Yes.
And the lectures you're supposed to attend.
Yes.
There's nothing like that for these labs.
No.
Finally, sir, there were two other things that were missing from the defense exhibit that sort of captured otherwise the entire course of that first year of the grad program. Is that fair?
Yes.
One of them was the grant writing workshop. Was that not on there, or was that on there?
It was on the timeline, if that's what you're
Yes.
referring to. Yes.
Okay, that was on there. And that's, just to set up for the future, that's Professor Dan Tolan who was part of that?
Yes.
And the second thing was, I'm sorry I didn't write it down, the psychiatric basis,
Yeah.
or the...
So that was the biological basis of psychiatric and neurological disorders.
Okay, and all the things that were on that defense exhibit, this defendant successfully completed, other than the prelims?
Yes.
Nothing further, Your Honor. Thank you.
Any requests, Ms. Brady?
I just want to be sure, Professor,
Why don't you go to the microphone, please? Sorry. Thank you.
on Defense Exhibit 8, there was a box for the biological basis of psychiatric and neurological disorders. So there were not two things missing on that timeline, correct?
No.
Okay. And do you have any idea whether Mr. Holmes wore contacts when he attended school at CU?
No.
You testified regarding the emails that Mr. Holmes sent to you. He was required to set up those practice talks with you.
Yes.
Do you recall Mr. Holmes ever contacting you when it was not required to do so?
No.
Would you say it's fair to say it's more rare than not that people try and complete the program? They don't just drop out as soon as something gets hard.
Yes, it is a rare thing.
Thank you, Professor.
Professor, there may be some questions from the jury. In fact, it looks like there are quite a few. So I'm going to ask you to wait for just a moment, okay? Members of the jury, there are enough questions here that I think it makes sense to have you step out and stretch your legs and go on break for just a little bit. Please keep my advisements in mind during the break. Don't go too far. I'm hoping that we can get through these in about 10 minutes. I'm going to ask the professor to step out of the courtroom as well so we can discuss these outside his presence, okay? Go on break for about 10 minutes and then hopefully we'll come and get you at that point. Everyone may be seated, please. The record should reflect that the jury has left the courtroom now. Okay, the record should reflect that we are not only outside the presence of the jury, but also outside the presence of the witness. The jury has submitted a lot of questions for the witness, and so I'm going to run through these now and see if either side has any objection. The first question is on the form that I have marked as number 53, and the question is, do you know if the defendant took the elective course on psychiatric and neurological disorders? If so, what is the general content of that course? Any objection, Mr. Brockler? Ms. Brady, any objection?
Same response, if he knows.
Okay, I'll emphasize if you know. Thank you. Next question is on the form that I have marked as number 54. The question is, what does it mean when Professor Delacroix says he's concerned by his experimental capabilities, if you know what he meant by that? Any objection, Mr. Brockler?
I think it calls for hearsay for court certification.
Okay. Ms. Brady?
I would know talked about, both sides talked about what criticisms were, and if he knows what that means,
Well, if he knows, it's hearsay. If he doesn't know, then it's speculation. So either way, I think it's an inadmissible question. So I will sustain the objection. It sounds like Dr. Delacroix or Professor Delacroix is going to address it anyway. So I will not ask this question. The next question is, was the school start date August 12, 2012, as stated by defense attorney and witness? And then the rest of the question says, on August 12, 2013, was early on the defendant's interrogation. I'm not sure what the rest of that means, but the question, I think, makes sense. Is there any objection to just the question, was the school start date August 12, 2012, as stated by the defense attorney and the witness? And I think I can just modify it to delete the last part of the question and just ask if the school start date was August 12, 2012. I'm assuming that he's going to correct that.
No objection.
All right, any objection?
no objection. What was the last? I didn't understand the part of the court.
Then that, right after that, below that, it says on August 12, 2013. And then below that, in parentheses, it says was early in the defendant's interrogation, in parentheses. So I don't understand what the rest of that says.
I don't even have the direction of the court's those.
All right. The next question is on the form that I have marked as number 56. The question is, were the defendant's facial expressions in the picture consistent with what you've seen during one-on-one sessions? Eyes wide, tired. Mr. Brockler?
No objection.
Ms. Brady?
No objection.
Okay, next question is on the form that I have marked as number 57. Could you demonstrate the odd hand gestures and facial expressions that James made? Mr. Brockler?
I have no objection.
Ms. Brady?
No objection.
Okay. Next question is on the form that I have marked as number 58. Are candidates for the neuroscience program given expectations to include communication requirement prior to enrolling? If so, when and how are they given? Mr. Bruckler? No objection. Any objection?
No objection.
Thank you, Ms. Brady. Next is the form that I have marked as number 59. The first question is, in your opinion, can people who are introverted / socially awkward / quiet / reserved excel / succeed in the program at CU? Any objection? Any objection?
No.
The next question on the same form is, in your opinion, did the defendant not succeed at CU due to his introversion / lack of social awareness? Any objection? Any objection?
Judge, I worry that might be speculation. So I would object as speculative.
Well, this was his academic advisor, and this was his mentor. And so I think this calls for something that would be within his knowledge. I will emphasize that he cannot speculate, and he can only answer the question if he knows. Only if he has an opinion, I should say. That's based on observations. Next is the question, or there is one question on the form that I have marked as number 60. You mentioned that the defendant being quiet, reserved, and socially awkward. Would you also have described him as disconnected at the time? And then in parentheses it says during the initial interview in 2011, end parentheses. Any objection? No, sir. Any objection?
No.
Great. All right, let's bring the jury back, please. And let's bring the witness back as well, please. Okay, please be seated, everyone. The record should reflect that the jury has joined us again. Thank you for your patience, folks. Professor, the jury has submitted a lot of questions, and based on the rules of evidence and other applicable rules of law, I have determined that some of these questions are appropriate, and so I am going to ask them now.
Okay.
The first question is, do you know if the defendant took the elective course on psychiatric and neurological disorders? And if so, what is the general content of that course? And you should only answer the question if you actually know.
I don't exactly know whether he took the course and what the exact contents are.
Okay. The next question is, was the school start date August 12, 2012?
I'm not sure. I can't
Okay.
recollect the exact date.
The next question is, were the defendant's facial expressions in the picture consistent with what you've seen during one-on-one sessions, eyes wide and tired?
No.
The next question is, could you demonstrate the odd hand gestures and facial expressions that James made?
I think it essentially was what I had originally described as jerky movements that didn't go along with the rest of the body, and facial tilts and head expression, stretching of the scalp like that.
The next question is, are candidates for the neuroscience program given expectations to include communication requirement prior to enrolling, and if so, when and how are they given?
Could I have that question again?
Yes. Are candidates for the neuroscience program given expectations to include communication requirement prior to enrolling?
There are no communication requirements prior to enrolling.
The follow-up question was, if so, when and how are they given, but you're saying that there are no such requirements.
There are no official requirements for that.
The next question is, in your opinion, can people who are introverted / socially awkward / quiet / reserved excel / succeed in the program at CU?
This is my opinion. Yes.
The next question is, in your opinion, did the defendant not succeed at CU due to his introversion / lack of social awareness? And you should only answer the question if you have an opinion that's based on your observations. In other words, you cannot speculate. So the question is, in your opinion, did the defendant not succeed at CU due to his introversion / lack of social awareness?
My personal opinion would be probably not.
And the last question, you mentioned the defendant being quiet, reserved, and socially awkward. Would you also have described him as disconnected at the time during the initial interview in 2011?
If somebody could define what disconnected really stands for. Disconnected from reality? Is that the question?
That's all that the question states. So if you can't answer it, that's okay.
Okay.
All right. All right. Are there any follow-up questions, Mr. Brockler, based on those questions from the jury?
Briefly, Judge. With regards to the start time for the school, I think the question asked about 2012. Does it make any difference if we change the year and say August of 2011 as to when school started?
I don't know. The school start date sort of varies a bit in August. So like this year it's August 31st. So I don't exactly remember what the start date for that particular year was.
Okay. With regard to the question about the picture that we put up there, and I'd asked you a couple, but I want to follow up on the one you got asked here. Had you ever seen the defendant in your office in those 10 meetings you described on no sleep?
Not that I know of.
There was a question that you sought some clarification on as to whether or not the defendant was disconnected during your interview. Do you remember that?
Yes.
So that I can follow up on that question, when he interviewed with you, was he responsive to your questions?
Yes.
Did he seem engaged enough to participate in the interview?
He did participate in the interview, yes.
Nothing else, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Brady, do you have any follow-up questions?
Just to make sure it's clear, Professor, the school year that we're talking about with Mr. Holmes would have been from August 2011 into 2012?
Yes.
Okay, so if we said school started in August 2012, that would have been a mistake.
Right, right.
It was 2011 to 2012.
Yes.
And again, the question about being introverted or not interacting, that was a large criticism of Mr. Holmes in the lab, is his lack of interaction.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, may this witness be released from his subpoena?
Yes, sir.
Is there any objection? All right, sir, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're released. All right, members of the jury, it's 3 minutes after 5, so it's quitting time. I gave you your admonishments earlier, and so I'm not going to repeat them again, but I will repeat again that they are extremely important and that each and every one of them is mandatory and each and every one of them applies to each and every one of you. So you must comply with all of them, please. Even if a single juror violates a single one of the advisements, it would create major problems for us. So we're trusting that you will do that. I know it takes a lot of discipline, but I have all the confidence in the world that each and every one of you will comply with all of my advisements. We have sort of an honor code, if you will, and we trust that you will do as I'm asking you to do. All right? Thank you, folks. Enjoy your evening, and we'll see you back here tomorrow morning at the usual time, 8:15. Thank you. Reflect that the jury has exited the courtroom now. Everyone may be seated. Is there anything we need to take up on behalf of the people at this time?
Can I bring up something really quick, Your Honor? It's a request more than bringing something up.
Yes.
We've had a couple witnesses in referring to distances say, oh, it's like about as far away as that wall or the back corner or something like this. What I would like to do is I asked Detective Apple to bring out one of these 100-foot measuring things. I want to have him measure a couple of things, like from the witness stand to that corner in the back, maybe to that pillar, and then I might call and testify about, did you measure that? How far is that? Just so that we have a record of how far it is when people are actually talking about those things. Is that okay with the court?
It's okay with me. Let's see if the defense has any objection. Mr. King? No? Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else, Mr. Orman? Oh, Ms. Tish McGuire has something?
And can he do that then when we're done with court tonight?
Yes.
Thank you.
Your Honor, just briefly, the court took argument the other day on victim impact evidence, and I don't really want to supplement that argument, but this morning at 5:17 a.m., we got an email from the defense with supplemental disclosures that they would like to use in the penalty phase. It was 13 photographs, 12 photographs of the defendant at various ages, and a map of some sorts. The people don't have any objection to those supplemental disclosures, but we would just like the court to consider, when the court's still considering whether or not to allow the prosecution to have those victim impact videos, that the defense today, 2 weeks into trial, is giving us new evidence that they intend to use at the penalty phase. So we just wanted to make that record. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Anything from the defense, Ms. Brady? Go to the microphone, please.
Again, Your Honor, there's a difference between mitigation in a capital case and the confines and rules regarding victim impact. So what we submit as mitigation is not held to the same rules, the same standards, and the same requirements as victim impact. So I would note that. The pictures we submitted are mitigation. They don't take any additional preparation. They can object to them if they think they're untimely, but I don't think that justifies victim impact coming in at this late date. We submitted 12 photographs. They submit videos with songs and stuff, so there are big differences.
Okay, anything else from the defense, Ms. Brady, at this time? All right. Okay, folks, have a good evening. I'll see you back here tomorrow morning. Thank you. The court will be in recess.
All rise.
Thank you, Richard. You want the